Thank you, Nasser sir, for that kind introduction. ISA Malappuram City branch is very close to my heart, and it's actually a homecoming for me because I became an ISA member from Malappuram City branch, and I was one of the secretaries of ISA Malappuram City branch. So Malappuram City branch is actually home to me from the anesthesia point of view. So I would like to share my screen. Nasser sir, it's visible, right?
Yes,
yes, it's clear and visible.
So the topic that I'm going to discuss today is NORA, that is non-operating room anesthesia. That is the role of the anesthesiologist outside the OR, because presently we also have a role outside the operating. So NORA refers to administration of sedation or anesthesia outside the operating room to patients who are undergoing painful or uncomfortable procedures. The indications for NORA are increasing due to technological developments in medical equipment, proficiency of proceduralists, and medically challenging patients. Now, the common procedures that we are called for include the radiology, gastrointestinal imaging, diagnostic or therapeutic interventions, pediatric cardiac catheterization, pediatric interventions, psychiatric treatment, and for dental procedures too. Now, what are the goals that we should have during the procedure, during NORA? We should guard the patient's safety and welfare. We should minimize physical discomfort and pain for the patient. We should control anxiety, minimize psychological trauma, and maximize the potential for amnesia. We should control movement of these patients so as to allow the safe completion of the procedure by the proceduralist. And we should be able to return the patient to a state in which safe discharge from medical supervision is possible. So these are the goals that we have when we go in for a procedure in NORA. So if you now compare NORA with an operating room procedure, now I would like to compare it with the traffic on the roads. Now, if you look at the OR is a sterile, serene, and peaceful atmosphere. The anesthesiologist is comfortable, and he's comfortable in conducting procedures. It's just like you look at this picture here, the cars are all moving in lanes, so everything is coordinated. And the anesthesiologist is familiar with the equipment, the medical, paramedical persons, and the availability of drugs are also available in the OR. And he can expect and delegate powers to suitable persons with whom he is familiar. Now, if you look at the situation during a NORA, that is a non-operating room anesthesia procedure, it is outside the OR. It's just like a chaotic picture here in this junction where you see there is a traffic block. So outside the OR, we have a lot of known and unknown problems, and we are vulnerable to mishaps happening. So this is just a basic comparison of a procedure that is done in the OR along with a procedure that is done in the non-operating room settings. Now, it is just like anesthesiologists who are not familiar with these non-operating room procedures would look like a fish out of water, or we would feel like the baby that has come out of the womb of the mother. Baby was so comfortably lying, and when he comes out, he has to breathe on his own and he has problems. So just like that is the situation of an anesthesiologist when he goes for a procedure outside the operating room. Now, 6 A's are very important. So it should be, first thing is applicability. Is it appropriate to provide NORA service? Ability, does the anesthesiologist have to be present there? Affordability, is it cost effective by involving us in this procedure? Availability, can we provide the service outside the OR? Affability, is it the desire of the proceduralist to have an anesthesiologist present during the procedure? And accountability, are we all responsible for the quality and outcome results? It should not be that the anesthesiologist is blamed for everything or every mishap that happens during the NORA procedures. So this trend or this should not be encouraged. So what are the destinations for us as anesthesiologists to move out of the operating room? We have a lot of tourist destinations within our own hospital where we can move out and provide anesthesia outside the OR. So the two destinations are, one is the radiology suite, the cath lab, the intensive care units, the psychiatric OPD where you are called in for giving ECTs. You could go in for a cancer wards, the pediatric wards, you could have field situations, or you could even be called into the ortho OPD or the ortho minor theater, or even you could be even called for transporting patients. It could be either by road or by air. So these are the various destinations that we as anesthesiologists can go for a tour. If you look at the cardiology situation, you could be called in to a electrophysiology lab where you might have to give anesthesia for an atrial or ventricular tachycardia ablation, or you could be called in for doing a esophageal echocardiogram to help the cardiologist in various procedures that he does. For example, a stroke reduction procedure that is shown here, a stroke reduction procedure where the LA appendage is occluded using a device, or you could go in for a heart defect repair where this is a PFO closure. You can see here, these usually will be done in children. Of course, it can be done in adults too, but in children, probably you want them to be very still while this is being deployed. So you have to give procedural sedation and analgesia. The other indications are probably for a balloon mitral valvuloplasty shown here, where a balloon is passed into the LA and the mitral stenosis is, the cusps are broken. And recently we have now started doing trans-aortic valve implantation. So this is again done in severe aortic stenosis, which is not amenable for surgery. So you have extremely elderly patients coming up for these procedures. And of course, for this also you have to provide anesthesia or monitored anesthesia care. In the pulmonology settings, they have started calling us for basic diagnostic bronchoscopy, like a patient who is not very comfortable lying on bed and is not cooperative, for taking endobronchial biopsy, for transbronchial biopsy, or for an endobronchial ultrasonography. Again, you are being called for providing monitored anesthesia care. Again, advanced diagnostic bronchoscopy also is now being practiced, and even stenting of the bronchi or the trachea, again, for which you are being called for providing non-operating room anesthesia. So you'll be there in the bronchoscopy suite. And this is probably one place where we are all being called day in and day out. That is the gastroenterology suite for performing foreign body removal, for colonoscopy, gastroscopy in patients who are not cooperative, and for also providing anesthesia for ERC. So these are various situations where you can be called in for providing anesthesia. And another upcoming branch is the interventional radiology, where you have procedures for treatment of malignancy, where they do chemoembolization or radioembolization and ablation of arteries to reduce the size of the tumors. Also for renal cryoablation, and for neurologic procedures like endovascular coiling. And even nowadays we have the uterine fibroid embolization in the gynecology place, where interventional radiologists do perform embolization of the fibroid. So we are now moving in from invasive to non-invasive treatment modalities, where we are definitely called in for providing anesthesia for these patients. It could be monitored anesthesia care, or a full general anesthesia, or even regional anesthesia. So the main concern for us is the concern of safety of the patient. This is because the number and complexity of such cases is increasing over time, and there are specific logistical problems that is beyond a typical anesthetic safety concerns. That is one, that is non-availability of pre-operative patient assessment. Most of these patients we are called in just like that, so we have not done a proper pre-anesthetic checkup. We have fewer resources. Facilities are often retrofitted for anesthesia care. Most of these places we will not be able to give anesthesia, and probably because we are being called and we force the management to provide us some area where we can give anesthesia. So most of these facilities are often retrofitted for anesthesia care. There is greater variation in physical setups and equipment. There is decreased practitioner familiarity. We are not familiar with the environment, the staff, as well as the organization there. And patient comorbidities are very unique to that particular specialty. So we should know about the particular comorbidities in that area. And physical access to the patient may be difficult in cramped rooms. And similarly, we might be having to have a shared airway. And the most important thing is usually there will be a non-availability of post-anesthesia monitoring. Probably after giving anesthesia, we will not be able to monitor these patients in that area, and we might have to shift them to a high HDU. So these are the various concerns for us other than from the anesthesia point of view. So the first thing is location. Most of these rooms are crowded rooms with limited access to the patient. There is suboptimal light, insufficient power supplies, and they are usually located in some corner of the hospital and which is very distant away from your pharmacy. Suppose you need a drug, emergent drug, it might not reach you. Similarly, since it is away from our comfort zone of our OR, availability of help from our anesthesia colleagues or from the anesthesia technicians might be very difficult to obtain. Similarly, the equipment. It is usually the outdated equipments are usually pushed into these areas. And because most of our ORs, we try to keep it very with modern gadgets, but the non-operating rooms are usually, we have the outdated or unfamiliar anesthesia machines. Again, availability of monitoring devices like the ETCO2, SpO2 and all that will be again hampered. We usually might not be having ETCO2 monitoring there. And the anesthesia provider is responsible for all equipment checks before the procedure. Then availability of suction might be a problem there. Availability of emergency airway equipment, which you are familiar with. Again, it's a question mark. And availability of emergency medications in these areas. So these are the things that we should take care of before venturing on to provide non-operating room anesthesia. So always remember the acronym SOAPME, that is SOAPME. So these are the things that you require when you're providing anesthesia at a distant site, that is suction, oxygen, airway. So you should have appropriate airway equipments. Similarly, the pharmacology, that is basic drugs for providing life support is essential. Similarly, you should have a basic minimum mandatory monitoring, which includes pulse oximeter, NIBP, ETCO2, temperature probe, and ECG. All this might seem as a luxury when you go in for your actual practice. Similarly, equipments like defibrillator, safe electrical outlets, and adequate lighting are very important. And nowadays, all of us have mobile, so means of reliable communication to the main theater when if you require help for calling for help, you should be available. So suppose it's a radiation suite, usually it is usually in the basements. So again, mobile networks are usually not available. So we should, at least you should know where the landlines are located. So very important for the postgraduates, it's very important that you have a source of oxygen. Suppose your central oxygen supply is not proper, you should have at least a cylinder, you should have a hand wrench to open the cylinder, you should have a suction, and you should have the proper electrical outlets. So these are the 4 things that you should make sure that you have before venturing into giving anesthesia at a non-operating room site. Similarly, the personnel or the support staff, the on-site staff are less familiar with management of anesthetized patients in these areas. They may even have limited medical background. So probably they might not be able to help you if you have a crash in that area. Similarly, communication and teamwork barriers, because anesthesia providers usually consider us an outsider. They're not very comfortable when we go there and we start demanding this and that. And these personnel are less efficient or effective, and it results in if inefficient or hurried patient preparation. And the staff may not follow rigorous pre-procedure check-in process in these areas. So you should all make sure before you venture into this. And again, in a department with many people, we always see that it is the junior most person who is pushed in for when a non-operating room anesthesia is being demanded. So it's usually the most junior most person who is just joined. He is usually told, okay, go. You have a OGD scopy there, so go and provide anesthesia. So again, that is not really what is what is desired. Now look, regarding the patients. Now, since these patients are actually, we are usually called, the availability and depth of pre-procedure assessment is not done usually, unless it is a planned procedure. And the ability of these patients to cooperate also, because they have not been told about these procedures in detail. So they might have claustrophobia, anxiety of the procedures. Again, consent issues are there. Again, positioning, we might have to position them prone for some procedures. In some procedures, they should be positioned in lateral position. Again, the comorbidities, they might have a lot of comorbidities. Nowadays, we are having a lot of patients who are coming with ASA grade 3 and 4 for non-operating room procedures. Also, their fasting status should be checked in before you start giving anesthesia. Again, this is one situation where this is probably every one of us would have faced this situation. We are called in between the case. Now, they would have started, they would have given cocktails of a lot of drugs, and sister would have given some midazolam, somebody else would have given fentanyl, and there would be no record of anything. So this is just like walking into a minefield. We really don't know what has happened. We don't know anything about the patient, and they will tell you, please help us. Patient is not cooperative. We want only 5 minutes. So this is the usual scenario where and these are the cases where we land in trouble. So there are certain age-specific anesthetic concerns. In neonate, again, the most important thing is difficult IV access, difficult airway, and again, there is a risk of the hypothermia and hypoglycemia developing in these patients. And an infant, we have, all of us would have faced the separation anxiety from the mother. Similarly, difficult IV access again. And in a child, again, there is issue of bronchospasm and laryngospasm. And in adolescent, again, fear and anxiety of the procedure. So this is, according to the age, we should tailor our pre-anesthetic checkup and inform them about the procedure as well as the what we are going to do. The anesthetic technique could be just simple sedation, that is the monitored anesthesia care, where you have what is referred to as conscious sedation, or you could even go in for general anesthesia. And the choice is again, you could use if you're giving full general anesthesia, you could use a supraglottic airway device or endotracheal tube. The considerations are patient comfort, and what is the requirement of the procedure, and what is the safety if you do this procedure with an unsecured airway. So all these things should be taken into consideration, and you can decide on whether you want to give sedation or you want to give general anesthesia. So this is a good article regarding procedural sedation and analgesia, that is PSA, outside the operating room. So they say that a combination of different drugs seem to have benefits for both the provider and patient in several indications. And what they noted is hypoxia is a common complication, and the risk of pulmonary aspiration is, however, low. And they say that performing procedural sedation and analgesia, although it looks simple, it needs constant practice and regular training. So if you're unfamiliar with the area where you're going to go, you could land in trouble. So there are a lot of drugs that we use for procedural sedation. I'm not going into details of all these. All of us use it day in and day out. That is ketamine, propofol, dexmedetomidine, midazolam, and fentanyl citrate. So these are probably the drugs that we use very commonly. And nowadays people have started mixing propofol and ketamine, calling it ketofol, and some of them consider it as the holy grail. But probably with the arrival of dexmedetomidine, I think it has revolutionized our care of patients who are going to be given a non-operating room anesthesia procedures. And probably remimazolam and remifentanil, once they become available, probably we will have, we can give better care for our patients by giving them better sedation and analgesia. So is there a place for regional anesthesia in non-operating room anesthesia? So we have talked about sedation and general anesthesia, but what about regional anesthesia? In most cases, it remains an adjunct to general anesthesia, but it is sometimes used as a sole anesthetic technique. The use of paravertebral block during radiofrequency ablation of different tumors is a recent application in interventional radiology. In emergency medicine, regional anesthesia is gaining traction as a form of analgesia for our trauma patients. So that is the 0-minute block that you give to the patient once he arrives into the ER. So definitely there is a room for regional anesthesia in practice of NORA. A very, very important thing is whatever you do, you should document. A time-based anesthesia flowchart should be available to record even when you provide anesthesia outside the operating room. So you should record the following things: what are the drugs administered, the time and dose, the saturation, heart rate, respiratory rate, NIBP, and the level of sedation. So these observations should be performed at 15-minute intervals for conscious sedation, at 5-minute interval for deep sedation and general anesthesia. Now, there are a lot of procedure-related risks in NORA. Suppose in an endoscopy suite, you are giving anesthesia for esophagogastroduodenoscopy or sigmoidoscopy or colonoscopy. There is a risk of aspiration, bowel perforation, and bleeding. And similarly, in ERCP again, there is a risk of aspiration, bowel perforation, and sepsis. And the problem that we face is we are not familiar with the workplace, and there are a lot of issues like non-availability of drugs and radiation hazard to the healthcare personnel. In an imaging suite, again, like the patient is undergoing a CT, then you have issues with contrast or dye-related risk, such as nephrotoxicity, idiosyncratic reactions that the patient can have. Again, very important, there is something called radiation hazard to the healthcare personnel. And again, in an MRI, you should be absolutely sure that you have excluded ferromagnetic objects, and it is very important that it is not there on your body or on the patient. Another area that we usually go is the catheterization lab, where the patient undergoes some procedures like to correct the heart defects, as I had mentioned previously. Again, here you have contrast-related risks with nephrotoxicity and idiosyncratic reactions. Again, radiation hazard is something we should keep in mind. So these are the special considerations: anaphylaxis to iodinated dyes. Techniques to measure temperature and avoid hypothermia are essential because these areas are really cool places, and especially in pediatric patients, we should be should take all precautions to prevent hypothermia. And another thing is radiation exposure. We as anesthesia personnel should be aware of the radiation hazards and take precautions to avoid radiation exposure. So what will you do? You should have the personal protection with wraparound lead aprons, thyroid collars, lead eyeglasses, and lead gloves. Probably lead gloves are the ones that are not available with us right now, and all the other three are available. So we should always demand that as anesthesiology professionals, you need these when you take patients up in the cath lab or wherever there is a radiation hazard. Another very important thing is MRI. Many of us would have been called for providing sedation to children undergoing MRI because you need an absolutely still child. And probably most of these places, except in the corporate setup, most of these places, all you have is a saturation probe that is MRI compatible. So it's very important that these are the various equipments and the MRI compatibility that should be done. For ECG, you should have high impedance graphite electrodes and leads. For blood pressure monitoring, you should have an oscillometer with non-ferrous gauge. For respiratory gas analyzer, you should have side stream sampling with long sampling line. Pulse oximeter, again, a non-ferromagnetic with fiber optic signals. Laryngoscope, you should have plastic scopes with paper or aluminum covered lithium cells. A temperature probe, again, skim temperature sensing strips with radio frequency filters. If you're using a stillet and a endotracheal tube, again, it's copper model stillet, which is advised. A laryngeal mask airway, again, the spring within the cuff valve may distort images. And again, reinforced LMA, Procel LMA cannot be used. Infusion pumps, again, not permitted inside the MRI suite. So you need a longer extension. And self-inflating bags, they need to be valveless with no ferromagnetic parts. And the suction apparatus, again, wall mounted with a 10-meter tubing. Defibrillator, again, not permitted into the MRI suite. Resuscitation usually carried out outside the magnetic field. Again, workstation should be non-magnetic machine, aluminum cylinders. So the AST5 MRI workstation from Datex is a good choice, and it's usually available in the corporate hospital setups. And a majority of us are not going to have this. Now, complications of NORA, there are a lot of complications, right from death to desaturation, to laryngospasm, to vomiting, unplanned admissions, and unexpected hemodynamic disturbances. So what are the most common ones? The respiratory complication. Respiratory depression is more frequent during NORA. Non-vigilance, inappropriate anesthetic technique, non-anesthesia staff handling a complex medical case, esophageal intubation during resuscitation, and unexplained bradycardia were noted to be associated with respiratory complication. It is said that about 10% of anesthesiologists usually have no backup plan for an unanticipated difficult intubation. So it is very crucial that we are familiar with the difficult airway algorithm, and we should be willing to call for help very early. The most common event in NORA claims was inadequate oxygenation ventilation, which is preventable with a vigilant monitoring using pulse oximeter and capnography. Hypothermia. Lower temperatures are maintained in diagnostic suites so that your equipment does not fail. And it is the pediatric population who are vulnerable to hypothermia. And although bleeding is uncommon in the setting of NORA, even mild hypothermia is known to increase the surgical blood loss, and thereby it increases the risk of transfusion also. Hypothermia also delays recovery and increases oxygen consumption. So you should have active warming measures such as body and fluid warmers in these areas, because these are areas which are where the temperature is maintained quite low. Another issue that we face in these areas are the post-operative nausea and vomiting. So all patients undergoing elective procedures, they have to be fasted according to standard guidelines. Now, administration of sedatives and anesthetic agents can blunt your airway reflexes, and it will predispose them to aspiration. Now, PUNV is the most common reason for unplanned hospitalization. It is usually preventable. So at-risk patients should be identified and they should be prophylactically medicated. So how do you do that? You use the APFIL score. That is the simplified APFIL score. And based on this score, you can decide on what is your prophylaxis that you're going to give. So these are the most common risk factors: female gender, non-smoker, history of PONV, and post-operative opioid. So these are the main things that can cause PONV in your patients. And even if you have no risk, you still have a 9% prevalence of post-operative nausea, vomiting because of the drugs that you use. And based on the score, you decide on the drugs that you have to give. The other common problem that we face is hypovolemia and hypoglycemia. Prolonged fasting can predispose to dehydration, hypovolemia, and hypoglycemia. Most of these patients are fasted overnight and they are taken up late in the afternoon. So they are fasted for more than almost 16 hours. So maintenance of a sufficient volume status before procedure by prehydration, the slow injection of intravenous drugs can prevent adverse hemodynamic events. And sometimes they are not fasted at all. So again, so these are two extremes. And we all know the recommended fasting guidelines. So you can make it a point. Suppose you do a PAC for these patients, tell them that you can take clear liquids up to 2 hours before the procedure. Again, alcohol should be avoided. Now, coming to the morbidity and mortality in NORA, it's a classic paper in BMJ Quality and Safety Journal, published way back in 2002. And they said these are the probable preventable anesthesia mishaps, and these are the human factors that are involved. Inadequate total experience or familiarity with the equipment and monitoring, poor communication with the team, haste, inattention, carelessness, and fatigue. These are the human factors which have led to preventable anesthesia mishaps. Now, looking at the closed claims review of anesthesia for procedures outside the operating room, And when you compare it with operating room and non-operating room, what we have seen is that the non-operating room anesthesia claims had a higher severity of injury and more substandard care than the operating room claims. And most of the non-operating room claims were done from the gastrointestinal suite. So inadequate oxygenation ventilation was the most common mechanism of injury. So here they have stressed that you should have maintenance of minimum monitoring standards, and airway management training is required for staff involved in procedural sedation and analgesia. What about your pediatric patients? Now, this is a paper published way back in 2006 in the Pediatrics Journal, and they found that the adverse events were not many. And the most common type of complication was respiratory related. And 1 per 89 NORA procedures resulted in an event which could have been potentially harmful if timely rescue was not performed. So 1 in 89 could have landed in problems, but they could detect it and prevent it. So again, the most common type was respiratory. Now, if you look at the other studies which have shown that sedation for children for MRI and CT is associated with risks of hypoxemia, and either you could have a risk of hypoxemia because of excess sedation, or sometimes you could have inadequate or failed sedation. And this is more likely to occur in elderly children or older children with higher ASA grade, and where benzodiazepine was used as a sole sedative agent. So in what they concluded was that probably in a selected group of high-risk patients, to get the best successful result could give general anesthesia, because you have to prevent motion to get a good MRI picture. Now, if you look at the growth of non-operating room anesthesia care in the United States, now if you look here, if you look at these pictures, you can see that NORA, the percentage of cases has gone up over the years. Also, the patients, the age of the patient has gone up. So you can now expect elderly patients to come, and this is being compared with OR cases. So when you compare with OR cases, the median age of patients undergoing NORA is higher. Similarly, the ASA grade 3 and 4, they are more higher in patients undergoing non-operating room anesthesia. So what does it mean? It means that among NORA cases with specified location, the most were performed at the gastroenterology suite. Anesthesia for colonoscopy was the most common procedure-specific type of NORA in the United States. Now, what is the safety of NORA? What about the closed claims update? They found that inadequate oxygenation ventilation was responsible for 1/3 of NORA claims, and it's often judged probably preventable by better monitoring. So everywhere you should have proper monitoring of patients. And when this study was done, it examined the impact of procedural locations and types of anesthetic on patient outcomes in NORA. Almost 12 million patients were studied. This was published in 2018. They found that the most minor complication was PONV, inadequate pain control, and hemodynamic stability. The major complication was serious hemodynamic instability, and overall mortality was higher in the OR when compared with non-operating room anesthesia. So the conclusion was NORA procedures have lower morbidity and mortality rates than OR because higher risk patients are being taken in the OR, contrary to some previously published studies. But there are increased complication rates in NORA suites, like in cardiology and interventional radiology. So how can we improve safety? We can improve the reliability of achieving a safe NORA, that is our goal. And consistent success in NORA, as in the operating room, can be achieved by adhering to structural and organizational standards. So the reliability of each step determines whether a particular algorithm or protocol is reproducible. So you should have a proper protocol. So risk stratification is important in patients who are undergoing NORA. So NORA is an example of high risk and low error tolerance setting. So you should provide safe and effective. So risk categorization should include identification of procedure-related risk issues. So preoperative consultation should be made mandatory so that you can have a correct estimation of risk and overall health status of your NORA patient. Besides obesity, cardiorespiratory illness are among the most important risk factors both in adults and children. So coming to non-operating room anesthesia of patients with severe comorbidities, you should always see that your patients are properly assessed, especially your geriatric patients, whether they are frail. So you should know what is the frailty index, what is the surgical complexity score, and the revised cardiac index, which probably all of us are using. So this is the frailty index. So suppose you have a geriatric patient who is coming, you should know that, and you should, the one on the right side is the surgical complexity score. And again, coming to the cardiac risk index, which all of us know, the 6 independent predictors. So all this should be done. Again, you have a COPD patient, you should know the GOLD classification. Patient has obstructive sleep apnea. Again, the stop band questionnaire should be answered before venturing into providing procedural sedation. So patient safety in remote locations, it has been identified. Major factors have been identified. That is an environment of continuous learning. A just and fair culture should be there. An environment with enthusiasm for teamwork should be inculcated, and effective flow of information should be provided. So the tools and targets are, you should have organizational tools, quality improvement methods, ergonomic designing of NORA sites. So what does it mean? It means that you should have a proper focused lighting to the anesthesia machine and the monitors. Similarly, suppose you're in an area where you cannot be inside, so you should have probably a video camera that is focused on the monitor and the patient. So that, again, that could be an ergonomic designing. You should have proper protocols, checklists, and you should have communication during the procedure and during the transfer of patient care. So proper communication is very important. So quality improvement, again, is vital to know that we should be proactive rather than being reactive. So before a complication occurs, we should know how to prevent it. So it is, so that is how we design NORA environment and be proactive. The American Society of Anesthesiologists have given their standards and practice parameters for non-operating room anesthesia locations, and it has been amended. Latest is in 2018. And this is what they say we should have. Each location should have a reliable source of oxygen, adequate source of suction. They even ask for scavenging of waste anesthetic gases. There should be a self-inflating hand resuscitator bag, adequate drugs and equipments, adequate monitoring, sufficient electrical outlets. Provision for adequate illumination should be there. There should be sufficient space. There should be an emergency car, and along with the trained anesthesiologist, there should be adequate staff to support the anesthesiologist, and appropriate post-anesthesia management should be made available. Again, just like your surgical safety checklist, you should have a non-operating room anesthesia safety checklist, and this should be adhered to so that we reduce the risks associated. So non-operating room anesthesia in different parts of the world, the anesthesiologist directed care has proven to be well tolerated with less serious complications, and there is improvement in patient as well as the interventional professionals' satisfaction. So nothing is complete without saying something about the coronavirus. So non-operating room anesthesia, providing NORA to patients with COVID-19 requires careful assessment of patients and planning of procedures. Patients with severe symptoms because of or at high risk of COVID-19 are usually not eligible for non-operating room anesthesia. General anesthesia, deep sedation, airway manipulation, and administration of high flow oxygen should be avoided if possible in order to minimize the coronavirus transmission through aerosolized droplets. Regional anesthesia with minimal or no sedation is recommended. Patients should wear surgical mask, and low flow oxygen should be given via nasal cannula. If general anesthesia cannot be avoided, endotracheal intubation is prioritized over supraglottic airway devices to reduce ambient leaks of exhaled gases. So again, rapid sequence induction, avoiding mask pressurization, ventilation before loss of consciousness, a small volume, tidal volume of lung protective ventilation, and short-acting anesthetics may reduce the likelihood of coughing, avoid ventilator-induced lung trauma. So during recovery phase, aggressive treatment of PONV should be there. The most important thing is to prevent transmission of the COVID virus. So what does the future hold for us? The increase of NORA provides an opportunity for anesthesiologists to expand our role as perioperative physicians and leaders. With the continued growth of NORA, creating novel complex procedures and utilizing advanced technology that require new and deeper levels of sedation, anesthesia professionals are well positioned to guide a multidisciplinary team approach to improve practice, to increase value and maintain patient safety. We can act as a common thread that can serve as the unifying platform for all the medical specialties now requiring NORA. So we should take, or we should lead the initiatives to create standardized benchmarks and guidelines for all anesthetics performed outside the OR environment. And doing so, hopefully we can achieve safety profiles and complication rates similar to OR cases. Embracing these opportunities will allow us to expand beyond our traditional operating room setting and optimize patient outcomes in the growing area of NORA. So I would like to summarize by saying that it's an emerging field that is at the forefront of increasing the availability of procedural care. Utilizing new technology to treat a wide variety of patient ailments will continue to lead to a new challenges for anesthesia profession. So better understanding of the safe practice and risks associated will allow anesthesia professionals to be at the front line of this rapidly evolving and expanding subspecialty. Above all, involvement of a dedicated and a vigilant anesthesiologist is the best way of preventing adverse events during NORA.